0 to 100 is a podcast dedicated to bringing you quality conversations and insights on resiliency in physical, mental, social, and spiritual fitness through engaging discussions with those in the military and beyond.
Hey folks, welcome to 0 to 100. I'm your host Mark, with my co-host Steve, and today we have another awesome guest, someone who I have known for several years, and every time I checked, he was rising in influence and impact throughout the armed forces. He was Command Master Chief Dave Isom when I was serving at Group 10, Naval Special Warfare, and then he just moved on and on and on, and now he is the Fleet Master Chief at Indo-PACOM. And I believe he is the only Special Forces Fleet S.E.A.L right now. So I'll have him talk more about that. And his resume is just too big to talk about. But without further ado, Master Chief, thank you for joining us today. It is an honor to have you. Thank you for making the time to join us.
Hey, sir. Thanks for having me. It's a great opportunity to reconnect with you after having seen you in so long, and a great opportunity to connect with everyone here on the podcast. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so tell me if that was a blunder when I said you're the only SOF S.E.A.L in the GZC. Is that correct? Or
It's close, but not quite correct.
Okay.
So it's quickly been evolving. So there's actually another Fleet Master Chief, and he was our Force Master Chief inside of Naval Special Warfare. So Derek Walters, known as Wally,
Okay.
was selected recently to be the CENTCOM
Oh, okay.
S.E.A.L by General Kurilla.
Yeah.
Out there in CENTCOM. And then we have Rob Abernathy, who's a Army SOF special operations guy that is at UCOM. We have our S.E.A.C, Senior Enlisted Advisor to the Chairman, who was Air Force Special Forces, and now he was AFRICOM C-SEAL, and then on to be the S.E.A.C. So there's a few SOF guys, but I think me and Wally are the two first SEAL fleets to ever exist. So kind of unique, kind of cool, excited to be selected, and honored to be given the chance to keep serving.
So with little I know of SEAL and team guys, they like to generally stay within the teams.
That's right.
They don't like going outside the community, and the diversity tours are usually punishments.
That's
so
right.
For you to kind of transition, right, from a Navy only asset to kind of what you're doing and what you have been doing in the past, right, with SOCPAC, and so how was that transition for you? And if you just want to share a little bit about that.
Sure. Yes, sir. So I think luckily my career has been a career of transition. So I started out with 4 years in the fleet as a machinist mate before transitioning and going to BUDS and into the Naval Special Warfare community. And then did 4 years at SEAL Team 1, a couple of deployments out in the Indo-Pacific. And then I was selected to go to a National Mission Unit, which is also a different type of command, and a transition there. Forcefully changing how we think about things, I think, is good for us. It helps build resiliency and helps prepare us for future change. And so I've lived a life of change along the way. And then leaving that National Mission Unit, come out to SRT-2, where I first met you there at Special Reconnaissance Team 2. That was putting me back out into the theater SOF realm, which was obviously a big change. From there up to the 06 command level, where I was the CMC at Group 10, and then out to SOC North, Special Operations Command North. That's the Theater Special Operations Command for all of NORTHCOM. Again, out into a joint force environment. Very small portion of that command was SOF. Much more senior command, more civilians, different type of environment. So I think everything I've done has prepared me for this day as much as you can be prepared to have to jump into a command like Indo-PACOM that covers half the globe and over 300,000 service members out there daily doing great work for our nation. As much as I could be prepared, I think I was.
Master Chief, as you say that, I just want to ask a question. Throughout that career of transition, was there ever one of those transitions where you were like, wow, I'm really not prepared for this? Or you felt, or maybe you felt really outside your comfort zone at first, and you had to really dig in and learn and grow and develop to get to where you need to be?
Sir, yes, sir, absolutely. I think during my time with the National Mission Force there, I was thrust into the interagency environment for a period of time, with a focus on sensitive activities and working with the interagency. And that is entirely different environment from what we grow up in and what we're used to. So I had to learn to dress differently, to think, act, and operate differently every day. And certainly, you've talked about going 0 to 100 miles an hour and how SEALs sometimes only have 2 speeds, either 0 or 100. I certainly had to challenge myself to match the speed of those other agencies and organizations, many of whom have a much longer view, think State Department and relationships in a foreign country. They're on a 20-year plan, whereas we might be on a 6-month plan.
Right.
So that was a real challenge. But again, we try to prepare all of our young SEALs and sailors, service members, as best as we can. So I did have some schooling and some prep that got me ready for that, but it was certainly a challenge.
Yeah. Just like any good Marvel movie, I like to now go back in time when you were not a big and influential figure as you are today. When you were thinking about the Navy, just kind of, take us back to what made you join the Navy, and what were sort of the influences and what the journey was like for you.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a small town in North Carolina, a very close-knit family, had 4 siblings. No one in the service around me at that time, but my dad had served in the Korean War, so I knew enough about the Army to just be a little bit dangerous, I guess.
Did he tell you war stories?
No real war stories. He didn't talk about it much.
Yeah.
But I certainly had an appreciation, as I read stories, read about history, and I learned more about it. I had a great appreciation for him and his brother, who had both served in the Korean War, and I had an uncle that had been in World War II. So that was an influence, obviously. But I headed off, graduated high school there in a small town in North Carolina, headed off to college at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, down at the coast there. Unfortunately, it's on the coast, and so
surfing and picking up girls.
You spend a lot of time surfing and maybe drinking a little more beer than you should. And so I was easily distracted as a young man, and that lasted for about 2 years. And I realized that I just was not on the path that I needed to be on. Quite frankly, I needed discipline, and I knew that I needed more discipline in my life and more focus. And so started talking to some friends and others about what they were doing and what life looked like next for them, and met a couple of guys that were looking at enlisting in the Navy, and I found that interesting. So I talked to the same recruiter that they were talking to, and that's how I ended up in the Navy.
So at the time, you weren't thinking SEAL teams, because obviously it wasn't like widely known back then. So
it was not widely known. That's right. But as I learned more about it, I instantly knew that was something I would be interested in. At that time, we did not have a direct accession into the special operations rate or pipeline that we now have, so you had to go choose another source rating. So I joined the Navy as a machinist mate, went through the training up at Great Lakes, Illinois, to put me on that path, served 4 years out on 2 different ships with deployments out into the Western Pacific, and then submitted my BUDS application, and off to BUDS I went.
How was that transition of going from 2 years of kind of partying, surfing, enjoying your adolescent years, to Navy ship life? Like, that must have been a rude awakening. How did you deal with that? Was it hard at all?
Even boot camp which is meant to be a shock to the system. I stepped in and I felt at home. I felt like I had found the place that I fit, and was immediately thrust into a leadership position as the recruit chief petty officer with a company commander that he really trusted me to maneuver our class, our company around the base there and move from place to place each day. And that level of trust and leadership and responsibility, quite frankly, really shaped my formative years as I continued to move into positions of leadership. No doubt, shipboard life, much different from where I had been previously. But learning a lot about life, learning a lot about the Navy, about being on a ship, going around the Western Pacific, interacting with other cultures and visiting other countries during the first Gulf War timeframe as well. So being mindful and thinking about what is this that we're doing here? What is our greater purpose as I sit on this ship delivering bombs and ammunition, perhaps during an underway replenishment to a larger ship that was then going to go conduct combat operations. All those things that you grow and think about. So that was often a shock to the system again when you change, but it really felt like home. It was the place that I had found, and I knew that I had stepped into the right place.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about something that I find a lot of younger Marine sailors, right, soldiers may struggle with, which is they are focused on the present, which may not be as fun, interesting, or even sexy. So, which was ship life for you probably because you're already looking at going to buds. And I've met a number of people who were interested in buds like that. And eventually the motivation dwindles, right? Because reality and the present is nothing remotely connected to that. And so you're doing kind of, I don't know, working party, you're scrubbing the ship, or you're working in the kitchen, a galley, right? And meantime, you have to work out on your own time and you have to train and prepare.
Sure.
So you're self-motivated all the time. How was that period for you? Were there challenges, or how did you get through that time of preparation?
Yeah, great question, sir. So, I grew up swimming competitively as a kid, played rugby at UNC Wilmington, so lived a life of fitness and sports and competition. And so staying fit, physically fit, was an important part of my lifestyle.
You were already doing it anyway.
So I was already doing it. So that helped. I was surrounded by others, so there was an EOD detachment on our ship. So I was able to fall into workouts with EOD. I had a very supportive command master chief who I confided in and told him my intent, and he was fully supportive. He was a big fitness guy. He was a gym rat, so he and I would often, bump into each other in the gym there, and very small, tiny gym on a ship. But again, having those around me that supported it was important. And again, like you said, it's easy to get caught up in the moment and only be thinking about the present. And so I made it a point to often reflect on my past, look at where I am now, and to always be future focused and to stay motivated and think about what was next and what I wanted, what my goals were.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about the leadership there and the EOD community, because one of our first interview that went up was Marine Olympian, right? And Staff Sergeant Stefano. When he came to the Marine Corps, he was like 115 pounds or something. He was a kid, and he had a late growth spurt, right? And he went to the Olympics as a wrestler, but he credits the leaders that he's had in being instrumental, that believed in him, that said, hey, you can do this, and pushed him and let him go collateral and, let him go TAD and do these things.
Yeah.
And without that, it would have never happened. So it's great to hear that you had those people, but man, it's not always the case, is it?
It's not always the case. I'm extremely fortunate. I had a mom who encouraged diverse experiences and trying different things, traveling, experiencing things that would develop me as a kid. So that was great, and that started me off, I think, on the right foot. And then to be lucky enough to fall into, for example, a boot camp where the company commander, the chief, was extremely supportive of everything that I told him that I wanted to try to achieve. He helped inspire me. And again, fast forward onto the ship there. So you're right. You're not always surrounded by those people, but I think it's important for each of us to find those who will be mentors, those who will support what you're doing. And sometimes it's virtual. Sometimes it's through podcasts. Could use Jocko as a great example, another SEAL that's got a great podcast out there that a lot of folks listen to, talks about leadership. I think those types of things are great resources. If you don't have someone face to face, then there's just through the internet, through reading, lots of opportunities to find the things that you're looking for.
Did you ever have a moment where you had unsupportive leadership and teammates, and you had to find your way through that?
That's a good question. I think there were challenging relationships, is how I would put it. Maybe those that don't necessarily see the world the same as you, maybe focused on other things, may not have the time to help you in the ways that you hope.
You
to,
just
to
didn't
be
sync
helped.
well with them, right?
Maybe you're not
Yeah.
syncing well with them. Lots of different
Yeah.
experiences there. But I've been fortunate to mostly be surrounded by really great leaders who are
Yeah.
all supportive, all great mentors, really talented folks that
Yeah.
I learned tremendously from.
And I think my time, in SOF was like that too, where even when I was outside of NSW meeting some other folks, there's such a high emphasis on leadership, right? And humility and being a lifelong learner, all those things that if anybody prescribes to that, they usually turn out to be pretty good leaders.
They do. And I'll tell you, the positive aspect of facing either teammates or other leaders that may not think the way you do, you may not sync with them perfectly, your relationship may not be perfect. Those are important experiences as well as you think about how to build your EQ, how to relate to others who don't see the world the same as you. That's important learning, right? So it's good to have those tough experiences, much like my time working with the interagency, where I had to learn to find middle ground and to understand their mission that was maybe different from what our mission was, and still find a successful path forward. Those are all important experiences as a young leader that shaped how I am and how I think of the world today.
Master Chief, as you say that, one of the things that kind of strikes me is that, that during that period of having to go through the 4 years of enlistment while you're waiting to try to get the buzz and all that, right, is a very important topic. And we discussed this actually in one of our other podcast interviews, that amongst young people today, there's something very important that they need to have for being resilient and having, a steadfastness, if you will, and that they need to be able to delay gratification. In other words, I'm not going to get what I want right now, but I've got that long-term vision. I've got a sense of meaning and purpose for my life. And when I'm going through those ups and downs, it's okay. I can delay gratification because I know that eventually, or get to where I want to get to. Could you maybe just speak to that for a moment? Like, do you see that? Number one, do you see that in yourself? And what was your sense of meaning and purpose that really kind of kept driving you? But then also too, for our young people today, what would you say to them about striving to have that sense of purpose and ability to delay gratification until later?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a great topic. We could probably spend the rest of this podcast just on that.
Right.
So as a parent, encouraging my own kids to understand the idea or the concept of delayed gratification, of working for something over time. And it may take days, it could take weeks, months, years. Those things all matter. And the sooner that you start teaching that, the more impactful it is. So if you can, if your 3-year-old has a piggy bank and you can help instill the idea that putting money in that piggy bank is going to lead to something that helps them later on. Maybe it's saving all the way into preparing for college. That's money that we're going to put away for college. That's a really long-term goal, but it's important to establish and teach the concepts of short-term goals, mid-term goals, and long-term goals. And that's something that I had great parents that helped instill that in me.
Right.
I've tried to pass that on to my kids as well as others who I mentor and lead. And you mentioned, I think for myself, that there's a sense of service that, again, I think part of it was instilled in me by my father, seeing that he had served our nation. And then as a civil engineer working for the state of North Carolina, highway maintenance focused Department of Transportation, seeing him often, snowstorms, events that would disrupt transportation management, seeing him get up in the middle of the night and head out into a snowstorm to go help solve the problems on the highways of North Carolina. Again, seeing that he was dedicated at that level and that sense of purpose and sense of service, no doubt I soaked that up, probably mostly unknowingly, but having seen it as an example, it became sort of embedded in me and probably contributed to my career choice and where I am today.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
I'm going to put you on the spot and just share a little personal story of impact you had on me. And this is even before I even met you.
Uh-oh.
And that is, so my first tour on the Navy ship was USS Peleliu, decommissioned long ago, but it was pretty bad. The ship had a lot of issues. The SEAL was fired. Just before I got there was a suicide. I had a sailor that was about to jump off the ship. I didn't even know it, that I talked to. And 6 months later, he told me he was about to. So
Wow.
a lot of unrest, a lot of ethical issues, just IGs, just you could not number. And my morale was a little down because I came in very optimistic and hopeful of learning leadership from what I thought would be the best leaders,
Sure.
in any field.
Yeah.
Like military leaders, right? And I saw bad leaders there, ineffective leaders. They would constantly throw their people under the bus, and I would get just my counseling numbers were just through the roof, right?
Wow.
A lot of toxic shops, and man, it was so demoralizing. Coming to Group 10, before I met you, the previous chaplain, Dominic, says to me, "Hey, man, like, do you need help moving?" So forth. I was like, "No, I think we got the movers. I think we're good." "Hey, CMC wants to know if you need help moving. He wants to come help." I was like, "Huh?" That just came off so weird, and the way he told me that, I knew you meant it. That was even weirder. Why would the CMC want to come help me? And when I met you, I was like, "Oh, this guy's the real deal." Like, he actually meant that. He was going to come and help. He was going to actually break his back and help me move in if I asked for it. And so already I was intrigued. What kind of man is this? And the more I got to know you, the more I was just humbled by just your character, your sense of service. Like, if in civilian clothes, I would never think you're a SEAL Master Chief. And man, and obviously I know some of your story more with your dad, your brother, and just these amazing men in your life that have left such a imprint, and what a role model is. But I just want to share that with you. And so you rising in different places of influence, to me, has definitely not a surprise, but something I really am so grateful for to see.
Well, as you know, that's been a few years ago. So as a younger man, I was probably more fit and more prepared to help you move. And if you're like me, you're not very smart, but you're somewhat strong. You have to find ways to help others, right? So, no, I think part of that is it's part of the SEAL teams and teams in general, just across all our service. There's small teams everywhere where that sense of teamwork, of helping your buddies, helping your teammates, knowing that they're there to help you is so important. It's an important part of our culture. So not unusual to, when I needed help, raise my hand and folks would show up over the weekend to help me do something and to do the same for others. Just an important part of our culture. And I think you'd see that across all the services. So not unusual to have a CMC helping the chaps move.
So how do you? I mean, you keep rising in terms of places of influence in the Navy. How do you stay grounded, and where does your humility come from? If you want to just share that a little bit with our listeners.
I mean, I've always been, I suppose, a little bit of an introvert more than an extrovert, and probably again from my parents inherited some of that. Never a big talker, loud talker in the room. So that's part of it, just my upbringing. In the teams, generally speaking, most SOF operators are more humble than the reputation, more than most realize. I think we get a little bit of a bad reputation because of some of the books and movies that are out there, no doubt, and well deserved. And we, that's good. But when those things happen, that's good because it makes you re-examine yourself and your team and your community around you, and to ask yourself, hey, are we being as humble as we should be? Are we in the shadows, for example, as a SOF unit where we should be? So that's part of it. I've been just really fortunate to be surrounded by incredible teammates and incredible leaders where I've learned a lot from. So that's part of it. How do I stay grounded? I spend as much time as I can outside of my office, going around, walking inside the building, going to meet all the service members and civilians and others in the building. because I think special operations truth number one is humans are more important than hardware, and I'm a firm believer in that. That was embedded in my DNA and in the way that I thought about everything early on as part of the SOCOM enterprise, and so I carry that with me even today. And Special Operations Command Pacific, SOC PAC, is located in the same building with us. So every opportunity I get, I go down and touch base with some young service members, enlisted officer, and hear their stories, hear what they're going through there, or inside our own Indo-PACOM headquarters, same thing. Or I bounce across the street and go see MAR 4PAC, Marine Forces Pacific, and all the different component commands out there. Any chance I can engage with them, I learn something new every time I do that, for one, because as you mentioned earlier, the concept of lifelong learning, I'm a big fan of that. So those things all help keep me grounded. Those relationships, those interactions, they're important.
So drill in a little bit more for us on, your dad, I know, is definitely an influence, your brother, but if you could pick one or two sort of role models in your life that have been very instrumental for you, and kind of why, like what is it about them that have influenced you in a positive way?
Sure. Yeah, it's a long line and a long list of them at my age. After
it keeps growing, right?
35 years in the Navy now, and so I've had, as I mentioned, a ton of great mentors. I will tell you, my first boat crew leader at the Special Mission Unit where I was, Aaron Baldwin, chief type, hospital corpsman, S.E.A.L, big thinker, really smart, and the thing that I really appreciated was his constantly cool under pressure, calm in the room, level-headed approach to everything at all times. In the heat of the moment, in the hairiest of situations, he was always that calm voice and cool senior leader, and that meant a lot to learn from someone like that. Another great one, Mike Magarachi, who went on to become our Naval Special Warfare Force Master Chief. He had been a Command Master Chief. He took me under his wing early on, and when I was setting up a big realistic military training exercise out in a big city, he showed me how to do that, helped walk me through all he knew from his time having done that. He was more senior than me, but he took the time to teach. And he's still doing that today. He actually works out at the BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training Center, Naval Warfare Center there, where he acts as a mentor for both BUDS students and for the instructors, the staff there. He does great work, and he continues to teach and mentor to this day. So what a great role model he is.
I remember I ran into him when we ran MPEAK down there, and he came with a CO, and he's a contractor or civilian right now, right? But
yes,
he's just had so much enthusiasm and still learning and trying to find new ways to be impactful. So that was great to see.
Yeah, high energy, guy, and just he loves influencing others, mentoring, teaching, and seeing the fruits of those labors. So he's awesome, and I can't leave out my grandfather on my dad's side as another great example of a mentor. He was a hard man, poor Tennessee farmer out in Western Tennessee. Huge influence as a young kid, seeing him at his age, still out there getting after it, doing things that you wouldn't expect to see a grandfather doing. We'd go visit, and he had pigs, chickens, mule, horse, animals that he was caring for, and he's up, early to rise before me, and would work all day out there. So just phenomenal to see that level of work ethic impressed upon me, the importance of that.
Yeah, that's great.
As you kind of alluded to, right, with back in the day, all SEALs had a regular rating, right? Whether they're a corpsman or machinist,
right?
And I remember speaking with Ross Monroe too, right? First CMC, where we were,
and 10 there,
and same thing, right? He came in. You guys are probably maybe a little before you, but similar time.
Similar time, yeah.
And so I remember talking to him about this, how for you guys, being a SEAL is more of a skill set, qualification in the community, maybe not as strong of an identity. Whereas the newer guys coming in, right, where as SOs, right, special operator, that's all they've known, and they've only been in that world. Sometimes this is who I am. Whereas for you guys, there's other aspects of you before you put on the trident, and I wonder if that made it easier to be more balanced versus now more of a closed system where the trident is everything and there's nothing else. And so
Sure.
the identity could be a crisis now, right? Where there's a blip in the career or something, right? Some kind of speed bump. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, sir. Hopefully, it's not a crisis. I think there were advantages to that old model, that old system, where if you had a platoon full of SEALs back in that time frame when we had source ratings, you would have some really diverse backgrounds. You would have a SEAL who was a hospital corpsman. You would have an electronics technician, an ET, a machinist mate, a boatswain mate, a gunner's mate. So all those background skill sets, well, those are just more tools in your pocket, in your tool chest there in that platoon. So made a very capable platoon.
Yeah.
Imagine, if you're doing some interaction, maybe you're going to a location to help partner force, and they need assistance. They're building a schoolhouse, or they're working on a camp where they're doing some of the labor themselves. Well, I just turn to my toolbox. I may have a prior CB in there. I may have someone that's got some construction background.
Sure.
So that was very useful. What the new system did that I do think is important to note is it created a more of a schoolhouse like syllabus and environment where now, as I progress and in my career, I try to advance. All the things that I'm studying, all the things that I'm taking tests on for advancement, all those things are SEAL skill sets, SEAL questions, vice having to take a test in another rating, like a machinist mate, for example.
Right.
So I think it certainly professionalizes the force, gives you a better product that's been studying those things from day one, and they study it for the rest of their career.
Consistent too, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I asked that question for our Marine affiliated listeners, wondering why are we talking so much about like the SEAL community, but I think it applies to the Marine Corps too. So it's not uncommon that you see somebody who come in, 17, right? They get a waiver. I want to get that EGA, and they get the tattoo and everything. They do one or two tours and then they have a bad experience, and they are having an existential crisis because that EGA was everything. To be called Marine was everything, and now they don't believe in that anymore. So we see that.
Yeah.
And then there's people obviously on the other side where they believe in it to the end. But that could also be harmful too, because it's the only thing they believe in, right? It's a religion. Sir. And they joke, right? Like that Marine Corps is a cult, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of strengths with that. But obviously some darker sides too, right? If we don't protect ourselves from an all-consuming identity, that uniform is transient. Right? Military service is transient, it's temporary. And so if this is all I am, man, like you're in for a ride, right? Yeah. So I think it applies to the Marine Corps as well, right? I mean, Steve, what do you think?
Well, Mark, I think you're hitting on a topic that's very critical, I think, for everybody, right? Because for those of our listeners, if you tuned into our podcast with Dennis Volpe, he was a commander, a ship's captain, and the ship ran aground. And when the investigation was done, then nothing was done wrong. He did everything right. But it essentially ended his career in the Navy. And so he actually talks about the identity crisis he went through. He says, all I knew was being a Navy ship driver. It's all I knew. It's all I was. And to suddenly now say, well, now I'm no longer that, right? And so that reality that we might have to take the uniform off at any given time. And as Mark, as you talked about, the meaning and purpose, the Marine Corps has a very strong meaning and purpose that they say, okay, here's what as Marines we live by. And I'm sure the SEAL community is very similar, a very strong sense of meaning and purpose for what we do, why we do it, of service, of serving our nation. And so the question then becomes, it's so easy us as people to make our identity with that role, with this uniform. But I think that's one of the things we talk about with spiritual readiness and spiritual fitness. We talk about the idea that you need to have a meaning and purpose, if possible, that's greater than that. And Master Chief, as you even talked about, having a sense of meaning and purpose that's about servanthood. Well, that transcends, right? So the day you take that uniform off, I'm sure you'll find another way to serve, right? To serve our community, to serve others. And so that's just, Mark, as you say that, that's what just resonates in my mind is just how critical it is that we have a sense of meaning and purpose that transcends the uniform or the trinkets that we wear. I mean, currently I've got a FMF pin, I've got a enlisted service warfare pin, I've got a rank on my collar, I've got the cross on one collar because I'm a chaplain, and I could easily find my identity in those things. But I want to have an identity that's greater than those, a greater sense of meaning and purpose.
I do appreciate the bling on your camouflage
That's right.
uniform there. I like
bling,
that.
That's right.
No, I sir, I will tell you, I think the SEAL teams, not like the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, I think, really is a unique culture that really builds that, and it goes back to the saying, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine. They have just such a strong bound culture that is unique, that I appreciate greatly. The SEAL teams are a little bit like that, but we certainly have different subsets inside of the SEAL teams, and some very different opinions and cultures out there, with the East Coast culture being a little bit different from our West Coast SEAL teams. So some uniqueness there. But I do think it's important to have something larger than yourself, and the idea of service to something is important. We've done some looking at incidents, negative press, internal incidents inside of the SEAL teams and at BUDS. We're very self-critical, and so we constantly analyze those things and look internally at our culture and ask hard questions about where we've been, where we are, where we're going. Where are we doing things right and wrong? How should we change and evolve for the future? And so that does force you to question things like your culture, and what things are we doing to help instill this concept of service that's larger than just to yourself, just to your teammate, just to your team, and more broadly, what's that look like?
Yeah. I think that identity piece right now, right, whether it's the Marine Corps or SEAL teams, it really hinges on spiritual and social dynamics, right, that maybe get overlooked. So I talk about this with the Marine leadership all the time. We are really good at physical fitness because it's measurable. We have a ton of programs, right? It's very easy to quantify. Same thing with marksmanship and others, right? Very measurable skill sets. But when it comes to how somebody's doing in the inner life, we're very bad. We just send them when there's a problem. Okay, you just came back from deployment and the wife had a miscarriage. Hey, go see the chaps, right?
Right.
So there is a place for that, sure. And sometimes, and a lot of times, it's an act of care, right? It's like, hey, I may not know how to care for this person, but hey, can you, this person's kind of volatile right now. Okay, good. But as we work towards building resiliency, right, and we just talked over lunch about total force fitness and kind of where DoD as a whole is trying to go.
Sure.
Mind, body, spirit, whatever, X, fill in the blank fitness, right? Like the entire person. I really think there needs to be a shift and emphasis on how, okay, maybe we won't be able to measure a person's like mental and spiritual and social health the same way, but we still need to be as intentional as marksmanship, as physical fitness, in somehow building those resources up in a person's life. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, especially in your position now, as such a vast AOR, and that's probably what you do, right? You try to get a pulse on a lot of these different components that your team oversees. What do you think? Like, how do we,
Yeah. Sir, that's a great topic as well. And as you know, having resided inside of Naval Special Warfare and under the SOCOM umbrella, where they have the preservation of the force and family, the POTF program, for a long time, for sure, inside of SOF and in the SEAL teams, we focused on, as you described, just the physical, just our physical capabilities. But over time, and particularly during conflict and throughout Afghanistan, Iraq, et cetera, I think that's when we started to really see what we were doing to humans, right? The stressors of combat, home, the stressors on the family, those relationship challenges, all the issues that you see. That's when we, SOCOM, started to really put some focus on it and created the POTF program, which expanded beyond just the focus on the physical, also looking at the psychological and the cognitive and the social, and certainly hard things to understand, to focus on what types of assets and capabilities do you get or try to get, resources do you get to help in those areas. Spiritual, I think, is an easy domain to target. We've got chaplains that can help with that. When we talk cognitive, which is thinking about brain health and think post-exposure to blasts or injuries, what kind of specialist do you need who can assist in that domain? So some of those things are newer, and we're getting after that. The physical, as you described, it's been around a long time, so that was an easy one. Hey, we know how to PT. We know we need strength and conditioning coaches. The physical therapy aspects of it and recovery after injuries has become a big focus because we want to get, for one, we want our service members to be as healthy as possible. Nutrition being a part of that. So we're looking for longevity, how to get those injured service members back on the playing field where they're most effective and where they can stay healthy for a long and healthy career. So I think there are other factors that we haven't really focused on as well that are going to continue to be a part of it. And I think Total Force Fitness is looking at some of these. For example, what's your financial health? Mm-hmm. You can focus on all those other domains that I just talked about, from spiritual to physical to but if you've got major financial problems, that's going to be a big distractor,
right?
And that's going to reduce your effectiveness as a warrior, where we need your head to be in the game all the time. Environmental factors can come into play, right? Think about things like heat injuries, clean water, clean air, other factors from the environment. So those are all domains that I think we'll continue to refine how we attack those problems. How do we get the right resources to help our service members be the most effective they can be and to keep them healthy for the duration of their career. So really important work. Appreciate what you do as chaplains, as one of those important domains. When folks think about the spiritual domain, it means something different to each person. I grew up in a very religious family and, growing up as a kid, going to church. And so the chaplain has always been something of a role model to me. And I've appreciated my relationship with the chaplains like you throughout my career. For others, it may not be tied to religion. It may just be a belief in something greater than themselves or in another area. But it's an important thing as you think about resiliency. It's certainly one of those things that you want to be focused on in addition to all the other domains.
Right. We're in interesting times when it comes to spiritual fitness, right? Because as chaplains, obviously, we like to say and to think, and we're not the only ones. There's a lot of line officers and senior enlisted leaders that would agree where the spiritual is the foundation. It drives everything. Because, again, like you just said, whether they are religious or not, it's their beliefs, right? Their deepest values that are shaping their decisions and their outlook.
Yes.
So when somebody says, I want to kill myself because life is hopeless, I always say, that is a belief. That is a belief. And the only way to overcome that is a different belief. Right? So that's a spiritual problem, not just it depends on the person. Sometimes it could be a brain, right? Or because I know people with concussions can have severe depression.
Sure.
And that's been studied widely. So except for the exceptions and the outliers, right? Where something else causes a brain kind of abnormality. For those of us who are kind of in the middle, just kind of up and down through life, it's a belief, right? Like I come back from a deployment, I feel, man, my marriage is bad. My kids, they don't care about me. My career is not really going. Another person might come back from the same deployment and they're thriving.
Right.
But on the outside, we haven't really, there's not much of a gap between the two of us. right? And so it's a belief issue. And I think DOD as a whole can't be afraid to talk about that. And obviously, as a chaplain corps, we we're constantly like, right, trying to get on that soapbox. But just because we talk about spiritual things, it doesn't mean we're trying to evangelize. It doesn't mean we're trying to convert people. But it means let's recognize that dimension of warfare is tremendous and overlooked.
Yeah. No, that's everything you said right there, really important and spot on. And as you know, inside of SOCOM, one of the discussions under the POTF umbrella was discussions about moral injuries, right?
Yeah.
And so that certainly affects a lot of our forces that we put into combat and put them in tough situations where they have to make life and death decisions. Not an easy thing. The brain injury piece certainly affects those. I will tell you, I have a belief that mindset matters. And I think there are things that anchor and underpin each of our mindsets. And so the more resilient you can be because you have a strong foundation and those strong anchors that help shape your mindset and shape how you think really matters a lot.
Yeah.
You mentioned, coming home from a deployment and maybe you think just, hey, life sucks.
Yeah.
Someone could be in the exact same scenario, but just be looking at it differently. And they might not say life sucks because they may have a little more of a glass half full kind of perspective or mindset. And how do you get there? How do you get to that kind of mindset? Again, I go back to having strength and anchored in all of those domains, from the spiritual to because physical fitness certainly affects mental fitness. There's clear connectivity between the mind and the body.
Sure.
And so what are all those things that you're doing to have that strong foundation so that when you're faced with something challenging, you don't say life sucks. You say, hey, here's a challenge. I've been through challenges before. This is something I can overcome. This is a challenge. Let's get after it. It's a different mindset.
Yeah. And listening to your story on the ship too, right? And definitely your family life, where I think not just with you, but many others, the spiritual health is so informed by, like you said, the physical, but also the social, right? Where you have these positive people and these, encouraging sort of force multipliers in your life. And man, they have a 10x effect on you, right?
Absolutely. And that social domain as well, super important. That can be peers, that can be friends, civilians on the outside, that can be mentors, can be family. I wouldn't be here today where I am if it wasn't for the support of my wife, who is a rock star and has no doubt propelled me to where I sit right here with you now. I wouldn't be here without her. And so that social piece is really, really important.
So speaking of which, I was going to ask you, some people think a successful career in the military requires kind of sacrificing family, right? And we know many, right? We met many warriors who are white knuckling it for years.
Yeah.
And they're still going because if the moment they let go, that sandcastle, it's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And I've had people in my office literally who had a full military career and a full career as a civilian GS, and they were retiring, right? Like double retirement, and literally telling me, chaps, I don't know what to do because everything I've been working towards, this is the finish line, but my family doesn't want to have anything to do with me.
Right.
And I thought I was doing all this for the last 40 plus years for them, for us, but there is no us.
Yeah.
Man, so you from everything I could tell, you've had a great family life, and your family's been supported, like you said. They've been instrumental in everything you were able to achieve in the last X amount of years. So how have you sort of balanced that and worked that out?
Yeah. Well, sir, I'll go back to the finish line comment you made about someone who had lived through a long military career and civilian career. There's never a finish line in my mind, right? It's continuing to learn, continuing to grow, and you just have to keep that perspective all the way through. And I don't know where this life's going to take me and what's next after the military, but there's going to be something, and I'm confident there'll be something after that and something after that. And so for me, there's no finish line, and I think that's an important important for me in how I approach my life. As far as family, I mean, hey, I've certainly made more mistakes, and I'm sure I'll make many more. And if you had my wife in here, she could probably bring out a whole book full of them and list them all out for you. I've no doubt I travel a lot. It's tough. It's stressors on the family, tough on my wife and kids when I'm not around. I think you manage the best you can, and you try to focus on quality because you don't have the advantage of quantity. You're not there all the time, and so you have to find those moments where you can do little things that hopefully matter. I'm forgetful, and I don't always remember to do those little things, but I certainly try, and I try to give myself little reminders to, hey, offer to do the laundry, or offer to cook dinner tonight, or offer to sweep up, or to do any little thing that can help my wife, because she's got that full-time job of maintaining our house and taking care of kids, and she's our home manager and accountant and finance expert, and anything else that happens when I'm not there, she's got the reins and she controls it all. And so anytime I can lift some of that burden off her shoulders, I try, and again, I fail all the time, and she'll sometimes remind me of that, which is good. You need to have that kind of relationship where you can talk to each other about when you're succeeding and when you're failing. So that helps. Having some honesty and getting that honest feedback helps keep me where I need to be and keep me out of trouble.
Yeah, y'all reminded me of a statement that I heard before that, not really is it very often that anyone gets to the end of their life, end of their career, end of their life, where they're like, I wish I had worked just a little bit more, or I wish I had earned more money. That's not usually the conversation. It's usually a conversation of, I wish I had spent more time with the ones that I love, right?
That's right.
And so you're right. And I can totally, as you were saying that, Master Chief, I'm just, resonating completely, because my wife's the same way. She's always like, hey, I need a date night. And I've learned, okay, let's go. Just drop what I'm doing, because I'll work. Even when I'm at home, I've got projects, right? So learning to stop and pause and quality time is important.
Well, sir, along those same lines, if you think about it, you've probably driven down the road and you see a long string of cars coming along with their headlights on, and so maybe you pull over, or you turn on your headlights because you know that it's a funeral procession, and behind every one of those, the limousine that's carrying the coffin, behind every one of those, you'll usually see family. You'd never see a Brinks money truck.
That's right.
So I keep that in mind too. Like, where's this all going to end someday? Who are those that are going to be left behind or impacted? It's those that are around you here today, right now. So those are the things that you need to be focused on when you can. And I understand, as a military member, you certainly have a duty and a responsibility. Travel is potentially part of that. Deployments is part of that. Could be 24/7 that you're on the clock and you have to be ready to respond, and maybe a pager goes off and you've got to report in, and that's certainly a stressor on you and on your family. But then hone in on those moments where you can find that date night or find that moment to lift some of the burden off your spouse and be that partner that they need to be, and have those tough conversations. Ask, where are you failing at? Where can you do better? Where can you improve? And know that they're going to see it from a different place, by the way. We three, we're sitting around this table right now and looking at the room and the table in front of us, and each of us sees a very different picture because of where we're sitting. And just remember, that's the same for your spouse. They're going to see it from a different perspective, and you've got to accept that. And remember that you may not always agree with or like the way that they're seeing it, but you certainly have to appreciate their perspective, and then how do we meet in the middle and get where we need to be successful.
I like to say, because sometimes people are black and white about it, where they say, well, the spouse works harder, right? Or no, like it's the warfighter, like they're constantly away and away from comforts, luxuries, and so forth. I think it's not a matter of competition, who has a harder job.
That's right.
It's a question of, but I do think, what does the spouse not have that the service member does, unless they're dual military? And that is, the service member has a greater sense of purpose because there's more boxes they can check for what they're doing. The spouse can, especially, a spouse that's like with little ones, they could feel like all they're doing is like yelling at little kids all day, right? And
Right.
like wrestling down,
Yeah.
right? Toddlers that are just saying no and yelling and throwing food. They could feel very little purpose. And they're like, what's the point of my life? Like, I went to college, I did this, I did that, I got trained here. And here I am, just literally cleaning up, mac and cheese every day, right?
Yeah.
And it could feel like their life is just being wasted away. And that's the hard part, I think, that family members don't have, that service members have a little more of, right? Because, hey, they just had a great deployment, right? And I've heard many that say, I want to go back to deployment. Because when they come back, they're like, oh my goodness. Yeah, I miss deployment. Because deployment, we can have tunnel vision, right? It's
That's
just
right.
a mission. That's it. Work out, be
Yeah.
fit, have the mission. Every now and then you'll get some MWR.
and surrounded by teammates who
Yeah.
see the world and think very much like you, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
it's an attractive place to be.
It is.
No, I think there's a couple. You said a couple of things there that, if you don't mind, I'll hone in on.
Please.
So we're talking about resiliency, and so let's talk about the resiliency of your spouse.
Yeah.
And I think about this at INDOPACOM, where at a big 4-star command, very officer heavy, very senior officers, very senior civilians, not a lot of junior enlisted, and so it's a different mindset and a different approach when you think about resiliency. And a big piece of what I always try to remember, and this ties into the spouse conversation, is people want to feel valued. They want to feel appreciated. They want to feel like they're part of the mission, and that the work that they do every day is in support of those things. And so you got to tell them that.
Yeah.
Yes.
You've got to find chances to talk to people and make them feel appreciated, tell them their value, show them the appreciation for what they do for the mission and how important it is. And so now that's the INDOPACOM piece. Well, when I go home in the evening, I have to do that same thing. I have to make sure my wife knows how appreciative I am of the hard work she does every day. If it's whether it's wrestling toddlers and picking up mac and cheese, or the fact that she balanced the accounts and the checkbook and took care of us financially, or maybe she watered the lawn and washed the car, or whatever it is. Those things that she does, it's all part of our mission. In our family, we call it Team Isom. And so this goes all the way back to when I was first becoming a command master chief and went to the CMC school. And they had us bring spouses up for the final few days or week of the course there. And one of the things you do is you have to write a mission statement as a family, as a husband and wife.
That's great.
And ours was Team Isom, and we talked about the importance of our communication and how we would live each day and support each other. And again, I fail miserably at it. I suck. Okay, I'm not good at all at this, but I do try where I can. I try to remind her of how she is part of the mission, how I couldn't do my job without her support, how her job is really more important than mine in a lot of ways. I mean, she's raising the future of tomorrow. Those kids, that we have they're going to be our future leaders, and so she is the core and the base of all that. So that's an important part of what we do at INDOPACOM, and me personally as a spouse. I try to. Again, I fail every day, but I try to get better.
Yeah.
That's really good. That makes me even want to say, I don't even know if I've ever articulated a family mission statement. I think I've got an idea in my mind of what that is, but to actually articulate that on paper and maybe talk about it as a family, and then say, is this something that we all can get behind? And everybody says yes. So that way, when you go through those really hard days or those really hard weeks, you remind yourself the mission statement. You're like, okay, all right, we can do this, and you keep motivating each other. And also too, as you say that, Master Chief, I was reminded even points and times throughout my wife and I in our career, we've reached, I think I'm at 22 years of service now, and so we've been through the deployments, the ups and the downs, and throughout that time, we've tried to always remember what our core values are, right? And realize that, if we can rearrange the finances in a way so that she doesn't have to have a job, then we've done that. Or if there was times where we realized our children's education needed to morph a little bit because it was sometimes it was a public school, sometimes it was a Christian private school, sometimes it was homeschool. Because as we were going through that journey, we recognized the different needs of our kids and where we were living and all of that, and reminding ourselves of our core values, what we live by, and ebbing and flowing that, right? And so So even just recently, I was telling my wife, like right now she's working, and I was like, well, and if you feel like the work is not where you should be at based on where we're trying to go as a family and direction, then stop working. We can do that. We can rearrange the finances. Just we can't pay for this as much, but we can pay for that, and right. And so
Yes,
just
sir.
living by those core values is so huge.
That's great, sir. There's actually a deeper lesson in there, I think, as well. And so I appreciate the idea of a family and its core values. And,
Yeah.
we all grow up in different cultural settings, potentially. If you didn't grow up in the same town where your wife is from, you may have very different religious perspectives. You may have different perspectives about parenting. And so, marriage is a compromise, right? So you got to figure out what are those core values that underlie and underpin all those things. And then what you talked about, the ebb and flow of your life as you go through different places, different school settings for kids, your ability that you just described to recognize that it's not a one size fits all
Right.
answer. Because I think it's easy for us in the military, in our military upbringing, to be somewhat rigid. And it's easy because you get to put on the same uniform every day. You don't have to think much about what you're going to wear. And so
Right.
it's easy to be very narrow minded at times. But you got to recognize that your kids may need some different things, and those things may evolve over time. So take that now and apply it into our service members, and think
Right.
about those service members that we've groomed through their career to
Right.
probably be very mission focused and to put on that same uniform every day. And we've shaped them in a way that may not be conducive to them recognizing that they need to try a different approach at home. They need to
Right.
be thinking about, okay, this isn't working.
Yes.
Let's look at the environment.
Exactly.
Let's talk
Right.
about why is my son or daughter not doing well in this school?
Right.
Maybe it's not the child, maybe it's the school. And to recognize those challenges, or whether it's the relationship, right, with your spouse, and is she overstressed, overworked, and if you can change the finances and do things different. So flexibility
Right.
being key, and flexibility being a big part of resiliency, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. You remind me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine once. I'll talk about how I love audiobooks, right? And kind of frowned. He's like, that's not like a real book.
That wasn't me, was it?
No, it wasn't you. It wasn't the EV and gas car conversation. And I remember saying, that the vast majority of the world, and even until recent times, and even currently, still disseminates knowledge through oral history.
Yeah.
The printing press and this is like fairly new, and it is not still globally the dominant way of understanding life and the world. It's through stories.
Sure.
And so I'm old school in the sense that that's actually the original, the storytelling. That's why we love audiobooks, because it's like hearing a story. And I do feel in this effort to change culture, right? Like everybody's talking about culture, right? At the highest level, that's the most strategic question. How do we impact and change the culture and make it more resilient? They say culture eats policy for lunch, right?
That's right. That's
And
right.
you being a NSW guy, culture is where the magic is. And if you could create a strong culture, man, you create a real legacy and a dynasty there, right? And so it's part of why we started this podcast. We believe storytelling is a culture change agent. So I'd just like to hear from your seat where, you're kind of you have this bird's eye view in such a vast group of people. First of all, what are your thoughts on storytelling, right, as a change agent, and how we can implement that more into leadership and in the military? And second, are you seeing anything like that in IndoPACOM or in your previous, assignments where you saw some standout examples?
Sure. Yes, sir. So great appreciation for for what you just said. So stories are no doubt compelling, and they're the things that often bind people together. Having a compelling story and being able to talk about things in that way, to tell the story is really important. I've recently been able to travel out into the IndoPACOM theater, and so not only am I concerned about those 300,000+ service members that are out there doing great work for our nation every day, but we have some great partnerships out there as well across over 30 different countries, and some partners and allies. And so I was down in Australia for the Chief of Defense Conference, followed up by a visit over to New Zealand, which I had never been there before, and I was really excited to go there. I don't know if you've read the book, or maybe you listened to the book.
Legacy?
Legacy.
Yeah, he came visited. I think group 2 or something. Anyway, he came over.
Carr, right?
Yeah,
James
James
Carr, I
Carr,
think's his name. Yeah. So great book on leadership.
Yep.
Great lessons in there. But there's a lot of storytelling that happens in that book, and there's a lot of storytelling in that culture in New Zealand, especially as you look at the Maori and the All Blacks and that successful team, that massively successful rugby team, and their culture, and the things that have made them so successful. And so as I met with the senior enlisted advisor to their chief of defense, their SEAC, their senior enlisted guy, and many of their other senior leaders, they all had some really great stories, great connectivity with their people. New Zealand, as a government and their Department of Defense, have really made it purposeful to connect with the tribal leaders and the history of the Maori people, and they've interwoven that into their military in ways that were just really unique that I had never seen before. To include at the beginning of every meeting, they would thank the leaders who owned the land prior to them, and those in the present, and those future leaders who would come. And they would talk about things in a really unique way. You would see the Maori language in many places inside of their documents and inside of their buildings. And so there's a real story behind that history of their nation, and a real culture that they've woven into. And if you think about the All Blacks as a winning rugby team, or as you think about a warrior culture, if you ever watched a haka, you see the warrior dance, extremely intimidating, in the same way that the All Blacks use it to intimidate their opponents. Imagine being confronted by a tribe of warriors doing a haka. So there's something there. There's something there with the stories and the connectivity and that culture that is just really important. And so whenever I can find unique stories from other cultures, and I can pull out little examples and try to weave those into how we do things, I think that's important for us to learn from others, and to continue to look for ways to cement our culture, to again go back to the things that underpin and anchor us as a department or as a command, to make us stronger and better, and to make our culture one that is strong. And again, we're a very diverse nation, and so as I look around Indo-PACOM at all of the diverse cultures and people and immigrants and others that make up our Department of Defense total force, from the civilians, the GSs, the contractors, all the service members, it's daunting to think about, hey, how do we all find common ground? And I think that's where storytelling gets real important, because again, that's where you connect with people, when you can tell stories and talk about things in a common way, and find those core values that we all share, those things that matter so much, and that connects us together. It helps us all focus on the mission and the vision, and to move forward and work together. And there's a saying, if you want to go far, you go together. If you want to go fast, you go alone. And so I think that's an important part of our culture out there in Indo-PACOM, is all rowing together with that goal of going far.
Well, Mark, I'm so glad you brought up this topic of storytelling, because storytelling is actually the bedrock, if you will, the foundation of a document that we've put together for our Marine Corps community, and it's called the Spiritual Fitness Leaders Guide. And so, Master Chief, I'll probably email that to you
love
here.
to have that.
It's actually hung on our website. So Marine Corps Spiritual Fitness website, just Google that and it'll take you there. But Marine Corps Spiritual Fitness, and you go there, and there's 2 versions of it you can download. But basically the premise of it in a nutshell is that as leaders, we want leaders to use stories to talk to their Marines and sailors about the components of spiritual fitness. And what we've put in there as the components of spiritual fitness is 3 things. 1, it's personal faith. Now, when you hear the word faith, you might automatically think religion, but personal faith is actually something much bigger. It's just really, what do I put trust in? And that could be the relationships, right? It could be my mom and dad. It could be brother, sister, aunt, uncle, the people that I most trust. And then, but then that could be my coworkers. It could be the service in which I serve, the Navy, the Marine Corps, Coast Guard, whatever it is. And then, but also faith in leadership and things like that. So whatever you put faith and trust in, of course, a higher power falls in that category as well. If you put your faith in God, but then the second category is foundational values, and as you just said, core values, absolutely right. So what are the values that I live by? So we have a whole category talking about that. What are the values you currently live by? And then the third category, we actually talked about it a little bit earlier in this podcast, is moral living. How do I make my moral and ethical decisions? So in the back of the book, we've actually just found stories on on DViz, which is a defense media site. We've collected stories that articulate personal faith, foundational values, and moral living for leaders to talk to their people about those three things in the category specifically of spiritual fitness. And so, I'd love to get you to look at that and tell us your thoughts on it. You might even find that that's a tool you can use within the Navy and at your current command, because
great.
it's all
Yeah.
about telling those stories and keeping people on a journey and a path towards living out foundational values and really having that sense of meaning and purpose, which we've kind of resonated throughout this conversation today. So
Yes, sir. That's great.
Yeah.
I look forward to reading that. And as you know, one of our component commands out there in Indo-PACOM is Marine Forces Pacific,
Right. Mhm.
more for PAC. And
Right.
of course, a lot of Marines in theater out in Okinawa and other places doing great work. Huge fan of the Marine Corps. And so I look forward to reading that. That's
Yeah.
cool. And I'll check out your website as well.
Absolutely. So using stories to lead is so critical. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. And I think sometimes leaders may feel pressure where you may have leaders that are very analytical and quiet, not as socially inclined. And, you know, some of it is personality. Some of it is a skill set. Some of it can be learned.
Right.
And there's obviously a balance there. But I think when you talk about the All Blacks, right, and I did read the book, and I had some takeaways. I think the most powerful stories are not from like a charismatic leader. The most powerful stories are collective stories. And like the All Blacks, like the New Zealand, those words and the history, one person cannot create that.
Right.
And that's why it's deep and it's rooted and it's something people can like cling to. Versus like some cult leader, right?
Yeah.
Who has a larger than life personality, who can take their people off a cliff, is usually not the best. And we have effective leaders that are like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think the most need is having, kind of communities throughout the DoD, right? Throughout different AORs where storytelling is seen as a normative way of just being, right? Being who we are, connecting. And I mean, we do it naturally, right? A cigar by the fire during deployment, telling sea stories, like making crass jokes. Okay, that happens all the time. Anybody who's been in the military more than a day has been to something like that.
Right.
But once you get back, all that is gone, right? It's part of why people have a hard time, right? Like in a staff job or, it's like none of all that seems to have evaporated.
Yeah.
Now I'm just like a 9-to-5 government employee. So I think we need to really energize that, right? And obviously podcast is one way, but there's other ways we could do that. Definitely through the media now. It's so much easier. So
Yeah, you're familiar with the topic of tribes and how in the SOLF world and across our militaries, we're divided up into different tribes at times.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've loved about the SEAL teams is the word team is right there in the title.
Yeah.
And team, I think, is foundational to our mission and what we do, not just in the Navy, not just as a SEAL team, but writ large as a team, as a military. Every Friday I send out I call it my Frogman Friday lesson in leadership. And I got that from my time at SEAL Team 1 when I first started out in the teams, and we had sort of Vietnam era Master Chiefs and civilians and others still around with deep experience. So on Friday, you usually do some sort of a monster mash PT session or really long run, swim, run, just kind of crush yourself and all your teammates. And it's competitive, of course, there's good friendly competition in there. But at the end of that, if you're lucky, you find yourself standing next to one of those old salty frogmen. And if you stand there and listen long enough, you'll pick up some nuggets, some gold nuggets and some words of wisdom from those old guys. So from there, I started looking researching each week and finding topics that I could expand on and push it out to Indo-PACOM. Before that, it was at SOC-PAC, and before that, when I was at SOC North, push out these Frogman Friday lessons in leadership. Less about wisdom that I'm bringing to the table and more about, hey, here's something I found that's interesting, may reflect on things that we've learned together this week. I might expand on it a little bit and tie it into something that a conversation we've had. But again, sort of storytelling, for the team there.
Yeah, you're probably like the cutoff, right? Almost for being kind of trained under those Vietnam vet frogmen.
That's right.
So, what do you remember from those mentors that you think like are worth passing on, to future frogmen? And it's like, wow, that's a legacy that could potentially go away, right? Because all the new cadre are not.
Sure.
So, anything stand out from
Yeah,
that,
I mean, they certainly had a unity and a level of belief in team that was really noticeable and important. No actions or words from them were about themselves. It was always about the team, the thing that was larger than the individual, and so that was important. They had a level of toughness and resiliency that was impressive, to say the least. So a great appreciation for the fires that forged them and made them those tough old frogmen that they were, and then their ability to continue to keep doing that as they got older, still out there running long runs and swims with the team and getting after it. So that type of demonstrated leadership is important, I think, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to be co-located with SOC-PAC, and as a SEAL, I still have to maintain my dive jump demo quals, and so every now and then you may see I do have a Facebook page as well as the Indo-PACOM senior enlisted leader, so you may find me skydiving in a post on there, or out running around with some young SEALs, and that's always awesome every time I get to do something like that. Not just the fact that I'm skydiving, but the chance to be there with other teammates, hearing their stories, hearing what they've been up to recently in theater, working with partners the way that they do. Just it's exciting, exciting to be out there and doing that.
That's interesting that you have to maintain that still. Like, is that the same case for officers? Like, I can't imagine an admiral doing all that.
I can distinctly remember admirals showing up to go get their jumps in, to go dive, and depending on where you're at, I mean, it's different for each service.
Okay.
The Army has some specific nuances to how they manage that, things like jump quals, etc. But I can remember jumping with at least one Army general down at JSOC when I was in the staff in the J3 there. Finding myself landing next to General Tony Thomas, was always pretty cool. So it's great to see them out there. It's an inspiration, honestly, for all the younger service members to see those commanding officers, those generals, admirals, all out there still doing it.
Right. Yeah. That's great. Well, I feel like I'm kind of out of questions, and we got a lot from you today, a lot of substance. Just love the conversation. Steve, you have anything else you want to bring up or ask Master Chief?
Oh no, just what a great conversation. Just really appreciate it. It's been great getting to know you a little bit more. I mean, well, for me, first time meeting you, but just the depth of character that you have, like just comes through in this conversation today. The character, you can just tell the core values are there. You're just living by them. Just to hear the story of you willing to help a chaplain move. I mean, that's so cool, right? And that just brings me. I wanted to share this story. This came to mind earlier in the conversation, so I'll share it now as we kind of maybe wrap this up. But this is a conversation I had yesterday that struck me very clearly as we've talked today about resiliency, about what is your foundation and what you live by, because it really does flesh out in your behaviors. And so the conversation was with a gentleman, and his job is overseeing, OPSEC and things like that. And he actually works with commanding officers when they've had an OPSEC violation to help them. How do they deal with those personnel that have made that violation, and to help them to get to help into why they made that decision, right? And what he told me, because he saw me as the chaplain in the room and he wanted to talk to me, and he said, what we find is that, there's a resiliency issue there, right? There's a, maybe they were lacking some core values, right? They didn't, what's their meaning and purpose and those kinds of things. And of course, we're saying, yeah, help that person get to the counseling that they're going to need to kind of dig in. And it was interesting that we had that conversation because we were actually talking in a larger conversation about, our our annual trainings, right? We've all been there, done that, right? The annual trainings where you go and you show up and they click through. They, all right, everybody sit down and go through our annual training today, right? And a lot of those are dealing with the behaviors that we want people not to do, right? So sexual assault, right? Alcohol abuse, and you just go down the list, right? And he and I just both talked together and we said, how important it is to know what your foundation is, to know what your core values are, and to make sure you're living by those, and to have like a self process that you go through to kind of say, well, how am I doing living by these values? So I just say that to say, as we wrap up, that if you will, to give everyone that passion, that desire to seek after that, right? And Master Chief, I'm sure as you go back and as you're leading all of your people in that sphere of influence, that sometimes I think we need to flip the pyramid around, right? And to say, let's get after our core values and why we live them out. Because if we do that, then all those behaviors we don't want people to do will probably reduce, right? So I just wanted to share that as we kind of get to a close here. Any closing thoughts on that topic?
That's great, and I agree. And I think as leaders, it is important to always be self-assessing, looking at yourself, figuring out what am I doing right, what am I doing wrong, what things, how do I grade myself, and so I'll give you a few things I grade myself on, and then we can close out if you want, and I'll tell you, as a sailor and coming from the Navy, we often think of ourselves as pirates. And so, everyone thinks that a pirate's favorite letter is R, right? But it's not. We love the C. So what I will tell you is all the best words start with C. And we've said a lot of them here today. As a leader, you've got to be able to communicate. So am I communicating with my peers up and down my chain of command? Am I keeping folks informed enough? And so I grade myself on my communication every day, and I try to get better at it. Competence. One reason I still jump, dive, and demo. I want to be a competent SEAL and available if needed, if called upon. That's part of our core values as Naval Special Warfare and as a SEAL, is to be competent. And so how can I lead others if I'm not competent? So I'm always looking for ways to get better, always reading, being a lifelong learner, and making sure that I'm a competent leader. Character. I mean, we hit on that throughout this podcast and talked about character. Core values. We talked about core values, another good C to assess yourself on. And hey, am I living up to my core values? Am I demonstrating it? Do others see me doing it? And am I setting the right example for them? And then we talked about the need to serve something higher, a purpose, higher than yourself. I think that's commitment. Another good C word, commitment. And then finally, we talked about this one a little bit earlier as well, and that's just being cool under pressure. I mentioned Aaron Baldwin, Doc, we used to call him, and his ability to remain cool in the hottest of situations and to be able to make those tough decisions with a clear head and to always be cool under pressure. Because if you're not the one that's setting the tone in the room, others will, or if they're responding to how you're behaving, then you can create unnecessary tension and excitement and often clouded vision in the room. So you got to maintain that cool under pressure kind of demeanor. And so I try to evaluate myself on all those letter C's. And I think in the end, what we all want as leaders, and we want as followers as well, is trust. You want to build trust with your people. You hope that they trust you and they believe in you, believe in your leadership, believe in the vision and the mission. And as a follower, you want to trust your leaders above you and know that they're assessing themselves, they're thinking about the hard problems, they're leading in the right direction, they're doing the right things, all for the greater good, and in this case, for our nation and for our Constitution, in support of the things that we as a department need to be supporting. So I'll leave those letter C's with you as sort of my foundational report card I do on
Yeah.
myself whenever I can.
Yeah, that's great.
And then I'll just say thank you. I appreciate you having me on here. It's great to see you, chaps. Great to see you again. Great to meet you as well. It's been great talking with you here and before this at lunch. And we'll have to do this again. Maybe you can come out and have a second interview in Hawaii. Maybe strategically pick the right time of the year. Maybe when there's some snow here, and you come on out to Hawaii where there's never any snow.
Just gotta package that TAD request the right way. But I've already embarrassed you enough, but I'm gonna embarrass you just one more time. That ship tour I've explained a little bit, but man, when I went to NSW Group 10, just some amazing people. Derek Nelson, you, and definitely I talked you up every time I met somebody else, and seeing you continue to move forward and up, it's just so gratifying, and I'm so grateful for that. And thank you, like just bending over backwards to make your way out of here. I know at some point your title will be too long, and I will be unable to access you because the gatekeepers won't let me. But thank you again so much for your time, and we look forward to having you on again sometime.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
This concludes another episode of the 0 to 100 podcast. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, be strong, be courageous.